the statistic of Democratic voters and their preferences is that in 2017, the sympathy with Israel over Palestine was up 13 points. The average Democratic voter sympathized 13 points more with Israel than Palestine. Now it's up 43 for Palestinians. Up 43, and that's despite the media blackout on all that's been going on. There's one more little bit from this clip, which is like 7 minutes long. We're not going to listen to the whole thing, but there's another minute toward the end where they get back into the question of Israel, and I wanted to give you a chance to opine on that as well.
He's young, he's new, he's only committed one sin in the eyes of these radicals, and that's to support Israel. So to get in touch with the base here would mean to give in to this nonsensical free Palestine movement. That's all he can do. Well, he shouldn't do it, and he's not going to do it.
I just want to point out. I mean,
it's Mamdani's base.
That is not Mamdani.
It's Mamdani's base.
I just want to say the majority, but Mark Levine, who won the comptroller's rate, was elected by the same electorate as he is Jewish. He's an advocate against anti-Semitism. He's pro-Israel. So the decisive issue in the mayoral election was not Israel, it was affordability.
No, we're talking about the activists who are calling for your primary.
And those activists have those activists.
What I was going to say, Scott, was that I have not seen that as a rationale. I mean, I'm not saying that it's not part of the rationale. I just don't know. So I just want to be clear that you're saying that that's what it is. You're suggesting perhaps
Certainly
it's that and other
true.
things.
Yeah, there's no question that's true, Mike.
But look, I mean, there's a list of people here, and not everybody is being primaried for the same reason, or threatened, I should say. One of the things that the co-chair of New York City's Democratic Socialists of America chapter says about Hakeem Jeffries is that his leadership has left a vacuum that organizations like DSA are filling. I think that is more important right now. To me, it seems like he is the one picking the fight with the left, and I think he should focus on fighting the right.
So I just find this so offensive. We have a two-party system. It is a binary choice between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, between Team Jeffries and Team Trump. And if you're undercutting the Democratic leader in his own backyard, you're doing the bidding of Donald Trump. That's what they're doing.
First of all, what rock is Abby Phillips living under where she doesn't understand that? No, Ritchie Torres is correct. People want to come for his head fully over Palestine.
That is, well, I would actually say, so I agree with that, but I agree with that based on his own logic. And let me explain what I mean. So he is saying the major issue is not Israel. He's correct. Most Americans are not voting based on Israel. The irony is that's what he focuses on.
Correct.
Maybe act like you're actually a U.S. representative and not a representative of a foreign country, and then people would want to vote for you. So yes, you're correct. The number one issues that are driving elections are not a foreign country. It is you that is centering a foreign country and only seem to be concerned about a foreign country. That's the reason people don't want to vote for you, because you're in fact not concerned about things like affordability, which is what most Americans are concerned about. On top of that, it's the basic things that any population in any country cares about: their ability to afford their life. That's number one, always. Their ability to afford healthcare, food, education for their children. Those are the basic things always. But on top of that, when you are advocating for a foreign country instead of doing that, that's a problem. When you're advocating and using US tax dollars and resources for a foreign country when Americans are struggling, that's a problem. And when you're doing it, not because you're protecting anyone, but because in fact, you're helping the mass slaughter of children and to aid a genocide, that's an additional problem. And it's like they can't understand the layers of problems that then create, this is the culmination of it. No one wants you in elected office because apparently all you care about, rather than affordability for Americans, is killing Palestinians.
And I gotta say, as someone who is representing one of the poorest districts in America that I believe has the highest child poverty rate in America, that is predominantly Black and brown, and for him to sit there and basically be demanding the public see him as a progressive, or at least Ana Navarro demands that the public sees him as a progressive because he is Afro-Latino and gay, and to be ignoring a Black and Latino population in his own district to shill for Israel is particularly venal, I gotta say. One other point about that clip, is it me or does he seem on the back foot? The way that he was deflecting to the economic points, which I think I agree with you, are correct. It felt to me on some level like an acknowledgement that he is vulnerable for doubling down on Israel in a way that he didn't seem vulnerable before. He has always been sort of bombastic and, very bold in his prioritization of Israel's interest as a U.S. Congress member. And this interview is one of the first times I sort of read his willingness to sort of compliment the less substantive, more aesthetic aspects of Mamdani's campaign, and then also credit his messaging on economics as an effort not to take head on the question of Zionism. And it was mostly Jennings and Navarro who were litigating the Zionism piece in that clip.
No, I mean, I agree with you. And I think what that is indicative of is the shift that we're seeing happen. Someone like Mamdani, despite the enormous amounts of efforts to undermine him, specifically based on the issue of Israel and the fact that he actually is against the genocide, vilifying him for not defending genocide, obviously failed, right? That tactic is failing. And so if any Democratic, this is his job theoretically, and if he wants to keep it, then that's probably not the hill that he wants to die on. And so he's he's not going to backpedal on that. He's going to maintain his support for genocide, but he's now trying to avoid the topic as centering that being the point because it's not working. So, he's being a shrewd politician in that sense.
Yeah. I like to see him on the back foot. I like to see him scared. You also mentioned a little bit earlier, you were talking about this idea that there should be more diversity within the party. Obviously, we should have multiple parties in this country. You're not the only one who's sort of talking about that at this present moment. Elon Musk obviously just announced the idea that he wants to start a third party. And Dean Phillips, one of the only Democrats who chose to participate in the primary that wasn't this last cycle, has also been weighing in, saying the very same thing as he articulates his frustrations with Zohran Mamdani and the sort of movement that he has shown a light on with his win in New York. I want to play you a bit of this clip since you raised that topic and get your response.
And, one of the things that I guess one of the questions here is the current DNC chair, Ken Martin, fellow Minnesotan, used you as an example in saying the party is a big tent. It can welcome people from different ideological, geographic perspectives. I think he used the example of you couldn't win a race in Ilhan Omar's district and she couldn't win a race in yours. Is there room for you and Mamdani in the Democratic Party?
I think it's a fine question. I think it's one that many Republicans have been asking about whether there's room for traditional conservatives in a party now led by MAGA Republicans like Donald Trump. The answer ultimately, I think, is no. We do share many of the same values. In fact, most Americans share a lot of the same values. But as a political party, yes, you want diversity. You want some differences of opinion, perspective, life story, politics, and experience. But when you have socialists in the Democratic Party, I don't know how anybody could argue that would be beneficial for the party or for the country. Therein lies the great challenge. Same thing on the right, Omar. Is MAGA the future of the Republican Party? If it is, there is going to be a new, grand, successful third party in America because the overwhelming majority of Americans want neither far left or far right politics. They want decency, they want common sense, competency, and cooperation. And no party right now is elevating candidates who represent those ideals.
So Dean Phillips, I don't know if you know this, I have been quietly in my personal life taking credit for him dropping out of the primary because he came on this show and tried to do a little liberal Zionism dance with me. And it didn't go very well for him. Insert clip, LOL. That went a little bit viral.
If anything, I'm telling you, I empathize with that. I was asking for mutual empathy, and I don't know if you just shared it with me, but I think you did. But you just asked a question of something that is it's just so historically inaccurate. Israel has been attacked because it's a Jewish state for decades. Now, Netanyahu is a different story. I'm not going to support him. What's happening right now is abhorrent, and his policies are abhorrent. It's true. And you can imagine it's not an easy thing to say for someone like me, but it is true. And I'm bold and I'm being honest and I understand. I cannot tolerate seeing this any longer. But Israel has been attacked since the day it was established by the free world after the Holocaust. It was attacked by its neighbors, and they survived.
That's like saying that American settlers were attacked by Native Americans because they were white or because they were Christian.
Oh boy, Brianna, holy moly, boy! I'm telling you, I got to tell you, I'm expressing empathy for Palestinians, for Muslims, for Black Americans. I'm not feeling what I'm surprised, to be honest with you, and I'm offended.
What is surprising about this, Representative?
I'm just surprised. I'm surprised by the lack. I just explained it. I'm surprised by the lack of empathy of progressives relative to the Jewish people.
But putting all of that to the side, why is it, dear doctor, that it always seems to be the case that if someone needs to get kicked out of the party, it is the socialists, the unprecedentedly large number of people who came out to vote in the New York primary, inspired by someone like Zohran Mamdani, and not the centrists whose policies the Democratic Party has been following doggedly to very poor results, not just in the last election cycle, but obviously in 2016 as well.
Well, they're never going to kick themselves out, right? It's always someone who's against them that they think they're the problem. I think it's interesting to use this word socialist as sort of like pejorative, like the scary socialist. We've all heard the phrase the American dream. The American dream was based on the idea that there was a, flourishing middle class in the United States. And what does that mean? That meant one person had a job, and with the full-time job that they had, they could run a household. They could afford healthcare, they could afford a house, car, their children could get educations without going into astronomical debt just to get a BA or an undergraduate degree. So that was based on changes that were made. If you go all the way back to the sort of like turn of the century and the progressive movements that we had then in the early 20th century, and take that to the post-World War II era and the policies, the New Deal, FDR, if you look at all of these things, like what is Social Security? It's a socialist policy in theory, right? Like that's what it is. So this word is used as a pejorative really to just describe what people are asking for, which is that their tax dollars, we're paying taxes, right? That their tax dollars be used in a way that actually helps Americans rather than spending, $1 trillion a year on killing people. And that everybody pays their fair share of taxes. So this mass amount of wealth inequality that we've seen continuously grow, and this starts in the 1980s and continues until this day, because it doesn't matter if it's a Democrat or Republican that's been in office since the 80s. It seems like everybody likes Reagan's economic policies, and that has been what has continued. And so that's when you've seen this massive gap in wealth continue to grow, where you have, Jeff Bezos having a $50 million wedding, but then there are Americans who can't afford their insulin. Like this is the kind of discrepancy we're talking about. And for most Americans, that's a problem. It's not that most Americans think that there shouldn't be like a distribution of wealth or people shouldn't be able to be wealthy. But most Americans believe that there should be some kind of justice within that system, where it's not so astronomical that the wealth of a few people is off the charts and you have millions of people in the richest country in the world, tens of millions of people who live in poverty. That does not make sense in anyone's mind. And so that word is used to describe someone to make them sound scary and bad, when really all they're arguing for is the precise types of economic systems we had in place that created that middle class. That middle class is now gone. That's the problem. The problem isn't that they're trying to create a new system. The problem is they're trying to go back to a system in which there was an American middle class. What happened to the American middle class? That's what they're trying to reverse. And so it's interesting that that's something that's representative, I think, within both parties, by the way. I mean, Republicans, ordinary Americans, working class Americans of all stripes will typically agree with these basic principles. The reason they flock towards someone like Donald Trump is because he is not an establishment politician. Now, will his policies actually help them? That's something that we can debate and question. But nonetheless, that's the appeal. On the Democratic side, they don't want that. They want the establishment person, and that's why they have failed. I mean, the only reason why someone like Joe Biden actually won in 2020 is if you look at the events that led up to the election in 2020, you have months and months of widespread protests in the United States. We're in basically the beginning stages, or in the middle, I should say, of the peak of the COVID pandemic and how it's affecting people's lives. People are scared. They don't know how it's being handled. The economy is being shut down. Businesses are being shut down. So in that kind of climate, yeah, Joe Biden won because people felt like there wasn't another choice. You had, at the beginning of 2020, President Trump assassinating an Iranian general, Qasem Soleimani, which then created the fears of World War III. It's under all of these contexts that someone like Joe Biden was able to win once all of the Democrats dropped out, just so that they could coalesce behind Biden against Bernie Sanders, right? So these are the types of like politics that don't work anymore. And that's why when it came to this last election, it wasn't even close. I mean, it wasn't close. If you look at 2016, Trump lost the general vote, but he won because of the electoral system. 2024 comes around, he very swiftly wins both. And that's because the Democrats are not offering candidates that are appealing to people. Less people voted. Even despite the urgency, it's not that they didn't understand the urgency of the situation. They did understand the urgency of the situation. It's that they knew that the Democrats were not up for the task of addressing it. So why even bother?
Yes, and that is such an important point, that they knew that the Democrats weren't up to the task of addressing it. Another way of saying that is to say, look at the problems presented. And in the fall of 2024, one of the major problems in polling from IMEU shows that the single largest motivator for people who did not vote for Biden in 2024, who did in 2020, was Palestine. And if you're going to look at the world's problems, the genocide in Gaza being at the top of the list, and ask yourself what the outcomes are going to be if Kamala Harris is president versus Donald Trump is president, there's a really difficult toss-up as to what it's going to be, as to what those differences are going to be, because Kamala Harris is representing herself as not breaking even one iota from Biden's policies, which enabled the genocide in the first instance. And I'm glad we have sort of landed here, because one of the controversies that's swirling around the internet right now that is very difficult to ignore is the fact that there's a major left content creator named Contrapoints who has been sort of heralded at various points and like celebrated by the left for doing really comprehensive, very smart, very aesthetically interesting, essay length, hour long, sometimes more, videos on various subjects that have had the effect of sort of unred pilling some folks. And as a consequence of that work, she was embraced by like Hillary Clinton and Chelsea Clinton on a show that they had, and she got some flack for that. ContraPoints got some flack for joining them. But the reason that she got that liberal buy-in at that time wasn't necessarily because you could point to anything specific in terms of her politics that was lib-leaning, but because she had just sat down with those two women. Also because she did some of that vote blue no matter whoing in 2020 and in 2024. But she's been in this sort of liminal state where people have started to question, why haven't you been saying more about Palestine? Why haven't you done a video about Palestine? But she's kind of enjoyed a certain degree of like benefit of the doubt. Like the silence covers, you can project onto her what you want to project onto her depending on how much you like her. Until yesterday. And yesterday, she did a lengthy post in which she explained her rationale for not weighing in on Palestine. And I think it gets to the core of, the dissonance and the break among people on the left and their decision-making at the ballot booth last fall. So I want to read just a little bit of this to bring everybody up to speed. ContraPoints writes, her name is Natalie. She writes, So many leftists feel betrayed because I haven't made a video on Palestine. Do they actually want a Contrapoints video about Palestine? Will they be happy if I get in the bath and pour milk on a mannequin of Benjamin Netanyahu? That's her kind of visual style, for those who don't know. No, I have posted about Gaza occasionally, and I've quietly given money to Palestinian aid organizations. But I think what leftists really want is for me to join their chorus of anger. They sense some hesitation on my part and are judging me very harshly on my presumed opinions. I'd rather be judged on my actual opinions, so here they are. Is Israel committing genocide in Gaza? Yes. Do I oppose it? Yes. Do I feel angry about it? Yes. I also feel a lot of other things. And this is where things go left. 1, doom. The week after October 7th, it was clear the mood among Israeli leaders and civilians was overwhelmingly kill or be killed, existential panic, and unstoppable lust for revenge. It reminded me of the U.S. after 9/11. There was no reasoning or protesting them out of it, nor was it politically feasible for the U.S. to withdraw aid to Israel on a time frame that would make a difference. I want to read that part again. There was no reasoning or protesting them out of it, nor was it politically feasible for the U.S. to withdraw aid to Israel on a time frame that would make a difference. That would have required replacing most of Congress and overturning decades of bipartisan strategy and diplomacy. Even in the best case scenario, it would have taken years. So there was a sense of futility. I'm going to stop there for a second. Dr. Rad, what do you make of this argument that there was no point in protesting or manifesting this anger that she says she had over Israel's genocide in Gaza because it wouldn't make a difference?
Oh, there's a lot to unpack here. So I think, first of all, it always makes a difference. Joe Biden is supposed to be the leader of the country at the time. The tone, the dehumanizing of Palestinians, he questioned the death toll very early on, which is something the media picked up on, which is basically genocide denial. And that is really important when it comes from the leader of the country. Just what he says is important. Let's put policies aside for 1 second. The tone that they set is extremely important, and it changes the way many, many people think. If Joe Biden had come out and said, okay, the genocidal language that's coming from Israel is unacceptable. If Joe Biden had come out and said Palestinian civilians are human beings and deserve equal rights, and we cannot support a vengeful reaction to what happened on October 7th. That's something that should be addressed, but cannot be addressed by committing genocide. That's clearly, there's no justification for that ever. Not to mention the fact that we're not, nobody's going to the historical roots or what led to October 7th itself, not to justify it, but to say that in order to find a resolution to any conflict or problem or issue, anything it is, whether it's your personal life or foreign policy or anything, you have to understand the causes. If you don't know the cause of a problem, you cannot fix a problem. It's very basic. So if he had come out and behaved differently, the whole thing changes. So no, I don't think it's an exercise in futility at all. I think it's an exercise in humanity to say that genocide is wrong. Now, why is it so important? Why does it have other consequences? The way that the Biden admin treated international law has been completely shattered. And I'm not saying it worked really well. I'm just saying at least there was an idea that we aspired towards, something that we could talk about. And that has been completely shattered. That's an extremely important thing that has consequences, not just for Palestinians, not just for the United States, but has global ramifications. We're seeing it happen. Why would anybody abide by any rules when there are no rules? When Israel has shown they can just bomb countries at will, why does anybody else have to abide by the system? So there's consequences on a global scale. There's domestic issues. If you are running on a platform that says, my opponent is a fascist, this is the argument that was made by the Democrats, that we are on the cusp of fascism in the United States. This is the argument that they made. Then how can you support fascism in Israel, a government that is an ethno-nationalist state that is committing genocide against a group? If the population of Gaza was Jewish, would this be happening? No, it's happening because they're not Jewish. It's happening because they're Palestinians. And so you cannot support that, but then say that you're against it. That undermines your domestic argument, part of the reason why you lose voters in America. And now we're facing the consequences of that. on top of that, I mean, it's just like just to say that it's a futile effort. I don't even know what to say. There's the fact that he actually had the power to do a lot.
Yes.
Despite, this is all, I'm just talking about the language. Don't veto things at the UN. Actually humanize Palestinians. I'm just talking about that. Now let's get to the policy part of it. In 1982, Ronald Reagan stopped the bombing in Lebanon with a phone call. Because in fact, all of the leverage and power belongs to the United States. It is insane when it's talked about as if it's Israel that has leverage and power over the United States. I mean, it does because of a lobby that allows politicians to be beholden to a foreign power rather than to their own population. But in terms of force and power, the leverage belongs to the US. There is a laundry list of things that Biden could have done to stop what was happening at the time and to stop what continued to happen. But everything that the Trump administration is doing now that road was paved by the Biden administration. I mean, when you look at this ethnic cleansing plan in Gaza right now, when officials in the Trump admin say, and when Trump himself says, well, how can anybody live in Gaza? It's uninhabitable. It's been destroyed. That's not entirely false. That's true. That is true.
But who did it? Under whom did that happen? Yeah.
Biden.
Yeah.
So you allow, and that argument was being made the entire time. It was like, look, they're destroying this deliberately because they're trying to make an argument for, well, nobody can live here anymore, so that they can force them to leave and never allow them to come back. Because in fact, if Israel actually cared about the Palestinian population, if their goal was not to eradicate Palestinians from Gaza, then just let them into Israel and then let them rebuild and then let them go back. But they won't do that. So look, yesterday we had the announcement of U.S. sanctions on Francesca Albanese, the UN Special Rapporteur for the Palestinian occupied territories, an outspoken critic of Israel for its genocide. She's literally just doing her job. She's writing reports based on the evidence on the ground because that's what her job is to do. You know who called her anti-Semitic? Biden officials. You know who vilified her already? The Biden administration did. So it's almost every aspect of it, when you look at it, all of it was already a disaster that was created by the Biden admin. You can't talk about international law now because there is none. It's clear that none of that exists. So not only do I disagree with the premise that this was an exercise in futility, I think there's definitely concrete actions that can be taken. But at the bare minimum, the language that you use, the way that you talk about it, the things that you say, those are incredibly important to the world and the leader of a country.
Yep. Pitch perfect. I'm like crossing off points I wanted to make as you're talking because you hit every single one of them. The only one I would add is that as a YouTube commenter, much of what you talk about has no real world resonance. It's not going to affect administrations, et cetera. And the idea that you're not going to talk about Gaza because it wouldn't result in a direct policy change, but you're going to talk about all the other gender politics, whatever else, comes across the transom, why men are lonely, whatever. and that's worth talking about. It's completely illogical, and it's quite obviously a cope for something else. What else? I don't know. Let's read just a little bit further into this and see if we can figure out what's going on here. The second point she brings up, the second category, is misery. She says, the leftist pro-Palestine movement quickly decided that their primary goal was not merely opposition to the genocide, but opposition to Zionism in general. That is, opposition to the existence of Israel as a Jewish state. And here they decided to draw the line separating decent people from genocidal fascists, which had the following consequence. It shrunk the coalition. Zionist is a very broad category. Most Jews are Zionists. Anyone who supports a two-state solution is a Zionist. It was politically infeasible. What is the pathway that takes us from the present situation to the dissolution of Israel as a Jewish state? I don't see how this could happen without either a total internal collapse of Israeli society or else, nuclear war. As usual, leftists have championed a doomed cause. It introduced dangerous ambiguities. The vagueness of Zionism as a political Satan enables all kinds of rhetorical abuses. On the one hand, right-wing Israelis hold up all anti-Zionist protests as existentially threatening and inherently anti-Semitic. On the other hand, there is a long history of anti-Semites using the term Zionist in deliberately equivocal ways, like Zog. Anti-Semites are happy for the opportunity to misappropriate the now popular anti-Zionist label to legitimize their agenda, and many people are not informed enough about anti-Semitism to recognize that this is what is happening. These problems are mutually reinforcing. So in summary, her argument is that Zionism isn't bad, actually. Criticizing Zionism as a Jewish supremacist project is tantamount to anti-Semitism, actually. This makes the left look bad because it makes the left look anti-Semitic. There is, in fact, anti-Semitism among leftists, and that's the real problem.
Well, would we describe Manifest Destiny as being bad? Because
I certainly would.
well, because the idea is there's an ideological premise that says that a group of people is has a justifiable claim to a land with an indigenous population. I mean, that's the crux of it. I mean, we can go into all these details, but the crux of the argument is there's an indigenous population and another group of people based on their religious or ethnic status, identity, is saying that they exclusively have a right to that piece of land at the expense of the indigenous population. So you don't like the word Zion, or you don't like that is associated with Zionism. Well, that's what Zionism is. There's no way of getting around that. So if you don't take issue with that political ideology, then you also don't take issue with the political ideology that led to something like Manifest Destiny. Now, the idea, what the solution would be in this case is something that I think can be debated very much. But what I would say is, even if you believed in the two-state solution, right? There was something that said, the two-state solution, if you're against Zionism, then you're against the two-state solution. Even if you believe in the two-state solution, which Palestinians did. Palestinians engaged in the peace process under the guise of the two-state solution. It's Israel that made the two-state solution impossible, because it used the peace process as a way of, again, sort of deflecting from the way that it was treating Palestinians, and continued its occupation, continued to expand settlements in the West Bank. And even now, you see, there's the argument that Israel will make, we withdrew from Gaza in 2005. The International Court of Justice decided last summer, because this is already something that has been asserted by, human rights organizations and anybody who is actually an expert in this field, that it was a de facto occupation because Gaza was controlled by land, air, and sea by Israel. If you cannot there's no sovereignty when there's no self-determination. There's no self-determination when you can't control your own borders or your own land or your own sea. There's no way of saying that that's the case. So this is a population that has been under the control of another state and stateless itself for decades upon decades. So really, this is why so many scholars will argue for a one-state solution. They'll say, well, the only way to resolve it, because then what is it? Just Palestinians have to be sacrificed? That doesn't make any sense.
Hey, YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.